Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Not only have I been the owner of Mint Mobile for the last few years, I've also been a customer. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
New activation and upfront payment for 3-month plan required. Taxes and fees extra. Additional restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for full terms.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Writers Toolshed. I'm your host Richie Billing, and today I'm delighted to welcome back Janina and Lucy from the Faith Fellows podcast for a chat about Beowulf and King Arthur. These two tales, the history stretch back all the way to the early Middle Ages, and they served as huge influences for the likes of Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, who went on to define the fantasy genre as we know and love it today. So I thought it'd be really interesting to dive back in to where it all began, to see what made these tales so alluring for the fathers of the fantasy genre, and what can we as writers learn from them, because they've been around for over 1,000 years and people are still harping on about them. So there must be some kind of storytelling gem in there somewhere. It's a really interesting chat, and I hope you're going to learn something new from it too. Before we get to that though, just a quick reminder that if you haven't already subscribed or followed the show, please do so to make sure that you don't miss out on any future episodes. If you really like what we do, a quick rating on the Spotify mobile app means the world. It's a great way to support us, and it helps other writers and listeners discover us too. We've recently hit 100 ratings, which is absolutely fantastic. So thank you very, very much, everyone who's taken the time to give that quick review. It really does mean a lot. So thank you very much. If you'd like to carry on your learning beyond this podcast, then you can check out our dedicated Patreon page. We have lots of free content. Even if you don't sign up, you can check out what we've got on there. We've got tiers ranging from £1 a month all the way up to £20 a month, where you can get access to a one-to-one monthly session where I can help you with any bits that you've got going on at the moment. If you want advice from writers or anything like that, yeah, you can check that out as well. And next month, on the 30th of November, myself and the brilliant book coach, Emma Dacey, are partnering up for a free class on email marketing specifically aimed at writers. Emma is brilliant when it comes to email marketing. I've invested an awful lot in trying to get better at it, and I've reached the point now where I'm feeling a lot happier with how it's going, judging from chatting with other people who are going through this as well, and sharing my ideas and the things I've learned with them. They've told me that it's helped them massively. So I think the time has come for me to pass on that knowledge to everybody else. And this class is completely free, just like the last one. And when you sign up, you also get access to loads of other free stuff as well. So you get a copy of a Fantasy Writers Handbook. You can also get access to another workshop called SEO for Beginners, or Search Engine Optimization for Beginners. This is ideal if you're looking to write a lot of content for your website, blog posts, guides, anything like that, book reviews, stuff like that. It helps you structure your content, structure your website in a way that search engines love, and means that you're going to get people visiting your website every single day for no cost at all, other than the time commitment that you put into it. So to get access to all of that, click the link in the description. You can register today for free via Eventbrite. And if you have any questions at all about the show, about anything else I've just mentioned, please don't hesitate to get in touch by emailing the Fantasy Writers Toolshed at gmail.com, or you can also get me at richie@richiebilling.com too. Right, now it's time to get on with the show, and I'm thrilled to welcome back, after a little bit of a break, Janina, Arndt, and Lucy Atkinson from the Faith Fellows podcast. I'm thrilled to welcome back to the Toolshed Janina, Arndt, and Lucy Atkinson from the brilliant Faith Fellows podcast. How's it going? You okay tonight?
Yeah, doing all right.
We were just chatting there. It's a bit of a while since we've all come together to chat about folklore and mythology.
Yeah.
So it's good to have you back. And one thing that I was keen to discuss was sort of the influence that classic folk stories like Beowulf and King Arthur and all the Arthurian legends around that have influenced fantasy, or influenced the people who have gone on to develop the genre, like Tolkien. And basically what the current trends are shifting toward now, if people are still enjoying them classic tales, or if now they're looking for something a bit fresh, bit different. So, what would you like to start with, Beowulf or King Arthur?
I think we do our Arthur first. I think the Arthur is the strong foot.
I suppose Arthur is supposed to be earlier in history also.
Logical.
Yeah.
So where did it all come from? I think I was saying to you before, my exposure to the Arthurian legends is the TV show Merlin. So
I mean,
not very much exposure at all.
I feel like it is for most of us, in recent times at least, anyway. And there's nothing wrong with that. The main difference I feel with Arthur and like other folk tales is that there is some historical basis which we've lost a lot of, but like there is some historical evidence that he was a warrior, not a king. But that's wrong. Scrap King Arthur. He also wasn't English, obviously, because he was fighting the English. He's on the British side. We're not entirely sure whether he was Cornish or Welsh. No stone castle, so basically all the setting stuff that you expect about King Arthur is all wrong. So there's no sword involved either, historically. Nothing that we remember really that we've got anywhere written down. But all these kinds of elements that we connect with King Arthur were all sort of added later on. So the sword was added later, but the sword that he pulls from the stone is not even Excalibur. Excalibur is the one that the Lady of the Lake gives him. So that's another common misconception.
I'm guessing there were no dragons as well.
I mean, I like dragons, so I like to.
Yeah, well, King Arthur killed them all. That's why there's none left to kill them all.
Basically, yeah. I mean, the thing is, we have no evidence for anyone called Arthur either. Is the next thing. But like in the 6th century, suddenly all the firstborn sons of any nobles were called Arthur. And then the first reference we have to him, which is a really cool reference actually, is in a poem about this other really amazing leader Gwathur, who who could do anything in the world, and he was the best sort of leader that they had in ages. But, says the poet, he was no Arthur. And that is the very first actual reference in text that we have to Arthur, the warrior leader. That's so cool, isn't it? You've got this sort of offhand reference, like everybody already knows who he is, everybody knows the story. We don't need to delve any deeper.
It's like a perfect bit of world building. I know you just reveal a little detail, just a little throwaway comment like that, and everyone's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. And that is what historians are looking at now, because for all we know, there might be quite a lot of truth to it. There must have been some kind of military leader who did fight the English off, for at least some time. And that is one of those things that's interesting. But yeah, so that's the origins. It's supposed to be, the original is supposed to be sort of set in the early 6th century, something like that. Yeah, unfortunately, the darkest of ages that we've got, even if historians are always on about how they don't want it to be called Dark Ages, but that is the time when we've got the fewest sorts of documents, unfortunately.
So where did it get picked up from there? Was it sort of storytellers and stuff just carry on this legend or the tales
Yeah,
of this heroic warrior, and it's
pretty
just
much
sort of
just that.
spiraled, escalated around a campfire.
Yeah, yeah. The only other like documents we've got are storytelling documents. It's quite interesting to see how different cultures have picked it up through the Middle Ages as well. Like the most important Arthurian legends that we've got, like you were talking about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. All of that sort of medieval stuff that then inspired the Round Table, Camelot, and all that,
Yeah,
which again, it doesn't really belong with the original figure. Um, all of that was sort of added on by French um, storytellers like Marie de France and Chrétien de Troyes, and they wrote all of their. There was Mallory who wrote La Mort d'Arthur, and they wrote sort of the classic elements into the story that we now associate with it, like Excalibur, like Lancelot.
yeah.
Sir Gawain, a bunch of other knights who weren't like Percival wasn't associated with that before, and the Holy Grail, which again probably wasn't a concern of the original Arthur.
Yeah, that's a proper curveball direction to go in there.
Yeah,
Just out
yeah,
of nowhere, we're just gonna throw a holy grail in.
exactly. That's
That was
we
that was
needed some
like
dramatic
getting
need.
yeah. Just everyone's losing interest in this now. We need to liven it up a bit.
Yeah, yeah. It's an old conflict we don't care about anymore, or
Did
it's
that come
also
at the end, really, of like the sort of the original tales of Arthur? Was that sort of thrown in at the end, the Holy Grail, or
well, no, that was thrown in like in high medieval times.
yeah,
So like 11th, 12th, 13th century. But like that's by no means the end of the storytelling.
yeah,
So after that, like we've got a huge amount of German retellings as well, who just actually focus more on Percival and the Grail than they do on, for example, the French focus more on Lancelot and his relationship with Guinevere because that's what the French were interested in.
yeah, romance.
So I think that shows quite a lot about the culture that you're talking about as well as what they like, what their storytellers pick out of the elements that different storytellers have thrown in.
Yeah,
So that is really cool. And then it goes on to obviously later adaptations throughout. Like it was basically adapted throughout history. Every single century has its own adaptations and references. Up to the point where you've got in the 19th century, you've then got Wagner who wrote Tristan und Isolde, and all that. He's got his Holy Grail in there. My parents live in a little quarter of a German city where every street is named after something in a Wagner opera. So
that's cool.
close by is the Grail Street,
Oh, nice.
and then there's Tristan Street right next to Isolde Street.
Yeah,
It's quite funny.
that's
Um,
really cool.
it lives on, it lives on.
I think that's what's impressed me more than anything, and it's probably the motivation for talking about it is the influence of these stories. I suppose you can even throw like the Iliad in there, and that or like
Yeah,
like a massive chronicle and story like that is just like even thousands of years later, people still talking about it.
exactly. For some reason, even though most people don't study those myths, we all know them. We still all know them. And they're known across the continent as well. Arthur is such a European myth, even though it started off with a very local little war leader, basically. He wasn't even a king of other people.
Yeah,
So just because of this enormous victory and the meaning for his people that carried, and that's what fascinated the continent,
yeah.
really.
I suppose people just love these figures. Like I do like a bit of historical fiction, and there's a writer called Christine Cameron who wrote about a character called Aram Nestos of Plataea, who was a Greek farmer who ended up basically being like a hero and defeating the
Mm,
Persian army. And he says at the end, like, there's no way to know for sure if he was real, but people spoke about him
yeah.
sort of in the same way as Arthur. And I think Ragnar Lothbrok was another character like that. People said,
Mm,
like, no, there's no way to know for sure he was real, but it was like, And that's what I suppose the same now, isn't it? Like we love heroes. We always
Yeah.
rally behind heroes and figures that we agree with or inspire us and stuff like that. So all throughout history, really. But I suppose just back then it was a lot more violent. The heroes gonna be
Yeah.
like killing people and. But yeah, so that's I mean, so where does Merlin come into it then? Like, 'cause it does go down quite a magical route, the Arthurian
Yeah.
tale.
Weirdly, he comes in quite early. I believe there are some stories in like sixth, seventh century that bring him in, although it's sort of he's not called Merlin from the
Yeah.
start. So there's a figure who comes in as a sort of advisor who turns out to have some powers, and then that is spun into like he gets Latinized to Merlin and it gets spun into magical powers. But for some reason, even though like in medieval times, Christianity was so prevalent that that wasn't that wasn't the expected thing to say. The magical powers didn't get taken away from him. It was seen as a good thing and it was seen as used for good.
Yeah.
So that's another strange thing. They did want to keep that element of the story and they did want to keep Merlin as a hero as well, which sometimes it happens that the zeitgeist changes and then they think, okay, now this person who we liked before, we don't like anymore.
Yeah.
But, in this instance, that pretty much stayed the same, even though, the Grail is a magical item, really, when you talk about it like that.
Did they ever
And
find it?
depends on the story. And some stories they do, yes. There's
Yeah.
a Fisher King who owns it, who is kept alive by the Grail, but has done something horrible and received a horrible wound and cannot die from it because the Grail is present. And at the end of the story, it all gets resolved and all that. But like there are stories where they find it. It's quite interesting because it changes shape as well, because it's one of those words that were sort of interpreted in weird ways. And the literal meaning of the first word that they used for it was serving dish. So at the start, it's a serving dish because someone like interpreted it as that.
Yeah.
Although in the Roman context, it probably wasn't a serving dish at all. It probably was something metaphorical of some kind. And then it gets changed into the cup that Christ drank out of at the Last Supper, and then it gets added that Christ's blood was caught in the cup. There are tales where the Grail is a lance that bleeds. It's we're not always sure why it got changed to what, but it's one of those things, just like other elements in the story that got changed. But Merlin pretty much stayed the same.
Yeah. I can't help but think of Indiana Jones when we talk about the Holy Grail.
Oh yes, that's one of the modern adaptations, really.
Classic Arthurian tale.
Yeah, counts. Just as much as any of the like French people who wrote the stuff that we now know as the classic stuff. They were just riffing off of something they'd heard from someone over a campfire,
It's cool. It's like a shared universe, like a collective fan fiction, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But it's amazing. Like, and it's people still write Arthurian tales now. I remember I was at Fantasy Con and I was chatting to a guy. I actually bought his book, and I think it's called Camelot. 2350 it's called. I've got it on the shelf there. So it's like if what I would do if Camelot was like still around in like
I mean he is supposed
future.
to come back. Yeah, Arthur is supposed to come back, isn't he? So
is he like a bit of a risen from the dead kind of thing? What's the title?
Well, he's never supposed to have died. He went to Avalon after he received his mortal wound, but there he's supposed to have survived and like been kept alive by fairies or whatever the story is. And then he is supposed to come back to save the Britons once more one day.
No, we could do with him now.
I know. It's a prime time for us.
Indeed. Yeah.
Come and get rid of
take
Liz
my energy
Truss.
bill, please.
Yeah. Come and heat up the country with your dragons and get rid of Liz Truss.
Yeah.
How did the dragons fit into the whole Arthurian tale? Was that like something you went off and slain?
I think they came in more sort of along Merlin's lines.
Yeah. They're quite Germanic, aren't they? You were saying in the past, the dragon stories. So do you think it's probably that strand of storytelling?
Not necessarily, because there's also the the very strong tradition of Welsh dragons to
Oh, of
be
course.
considered, and Arthur does appear in the Mabinogion.
Yeah.
So that's another strand of storytelling that we've got there. And there are plenty of dragons in the Mabinogion. So I would assume
Ooh,
that that's where they came in, really.
nice. That's cool. I like
Yeah.
no one knows where Camelot would have been, or do you suspect where it would have been? Because like
The
you said
Welsh.
Wales before. Wales sounds good to me, only because,
Yeah.
right? And I think South Wales, because Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, if this is anything to go by, it says in the poem that he travels north and ends up in the Wirral, which is not far away from where I'm from. And it's such a
Mhm.
random place to end up. The Wirral, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe South Wales or Mid Wales, whatever, around there.
The classic place is Tintagel, where they expect it would have been.
Isn't there
But
some kind of Merlin's Island around there somewhere as well? Or,
I think so.
or...
Yeah, I haven't been.
Yeah, I went to Wales relatively recently, and like everywhere you go, they're like, "This is the birthplace of Arthur." The Welsh are quite confident he is a Welsh
Yeah.
figure.
Yeah, he could have been
Nice.
Cornish though. He could have been Cornish, and I think the Cornish are quite adamant that he was Cornish as well. So
Oh, yeah, let's have a fight over that one. So, that's a pretty good overview of King Arthur. What about Beowulf?
Yeah, Beowulf is less easy to pin down because
Mm,
it's kind of it's a really strange tale in terms of the fact that it's like one of the really prevalent Anglo-Saxon tales that we have. It's written in kind of an Anglo-Saxon dialect of Old English, but it's sort of about pagan Scandinavia. It's not really
Yeah.
about the Anglo-Saxon England. We
yeah.
don't really know who wrote it, but it's kind of Tolkien would kill me for saying this, but in my understanding, it's sort of an epic, sort of heroic poem that follows this hero Beowulf through his kind of life as a young man, slaying monsters, and then as he gets older, his life slaying dragons and becoming king. It's quite Game of Thrones and all the like
Yeah.
the senses of regency and royalty and overcoming adversity to kill the monsters. That's
Nice.
kind of its strong background. But it's in terms of like where it was written or why or who by, it's not easy to pin down at all. We only know that it's in that Anglo-Saxon dialect, and really beyond that, we're like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes it really cool. The mystery. So when did it sort of surface? Anglo-Saxon times, and that was sort of what, towards
yeah,
the 800s, 900s, was it?
I
Early
would
Middle
think
Ages.
so.
It's supposed to be set in the 7th century, and the
7th century.
manuscript is from the 11th century though, so it's quite
Yeah.
far removed, and also like some of the edges have burned off, so
Yeah.
we don't have everything.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah,
supposed
they-
to have been written down after oral tradition, really.
Yeah.
So what sort of like things happen? I know you mentioned like monsters. Are there any sort of iconic scenes from the
Yeah,
poem?
so the first kind of half of it is really about this young hero Beowulf killing a monster called Grendel, who's been like generally bothering the people around him,
Yeah.
and going up against this monster in what is kind of a David or Goliath this like sort of esque fight,
Yeah.
fighting up against this huge monstrous figure, which is a fight of course he wins and overcomes.
Yeah.
And the last fight in Beowulf, I believe, is against a dragon, an epic dragon. So it's the classic draconic ending to the hero's tale, slaying the dragon
Yeah.
at the end of the story.
How does he slay the dragon? Just out of interest. I only asked this because I've been playing Elden Ring and I've been trying to kill this dragon and I'll get no chance.
I wouldn't think in the Elden Ring.
Yeah, you get some ideas, don't you?
I think he pierces him in the throat is what he does, but he also dies doing it. So
Oh fuck. That's how
because the
Beowulf
dragon,
dies.
he gets basically breathed to death with acid from the dragon. So there you go.
Oh.
Yeah, one of those classic Germanic dragons that don't breathe fire but acid.
Yeah. That'd be a brutal way to
Poison
go.
breath. Yeah.
And was he saving someone from the dragon?
Nope.
What,
He was just
pure
trying to.
vanity.
He's trying to get at the hoard and to like sort of spread
Ah,
wealth in his kingdom, sort of thing.
Yeah, because by that point he's become king, so it's like his responsibility to
yeah.
deal with the dragon.
Yeah.
Ah, well, never
Yeah.
mind, eh? Poor Beowulf. But it's interesting the influence that the stories had then, considering there was no author and it just sort of appeared, and I'm guessing this was one of them that's just been retold over time. But
Yeah,
like Tolkien, absolutely, like you mentioned there, absolutely loved it, and he was a big translator, wasn't he, of that old style of language. There's some really good essays he's put together and lectures that you can read about like Beowulf and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And like the influence that it had on him is quite profound. So like orcs, that's the first mention of orcs is like from around, well, in this Western society anyway, is like in Beowulf. I think they're called Orcus, and that's where the orcs came from. So are there any other influences that you know of that have sort of filtered the
yeah,
way through?
yeah. It became kind of a popular site for like an academic fighting match, sort of
Yeah,
during Tolkien's era. A lot of people took it as like a literary or historical, like academic accolade to try and translate Beowulf and have the best translation. The one that I know the best is Seamus Heaney's, which is a
oh,
great best translation. No offense to Tolkien, but best translation of Beowulf.
Oh no, Tolkien's translation isn't great. It's very unpoetic. I read that one and I had
yeah,
to read
you'd
the
go with
summary
the
afterwards
poets.
to understand.
I
Yeah,
know
you
Heaney's.
trust you trust the
Go on.
poet, wouldn't you, to tell the poem?
Yeah.
So I'll have
Yeah.
to get that Seamus Heaney. I didn't even know he was into that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
It's really great because the first word of Beowulf, which I will not even try to pronounce, it's something like Hwait or how or Hwe, is an Old English word which has been sort of translated and translated and translated again, and nobody really knows what to do with it. It's sort of generally sometimes thought to mean listen, like a
Yeah,
call to listen. It's sort of we know that it's some kind of like provocation of some kind, either like listen or hey or hear.
yeah,
Here's the story, but no one really knows what to do with it, and all the translators kind of messed about with it for a while, and it tripped a lot of people up. And Heaney was like, well, what I'm not going to try and do is translate this in any way that would be like, this is the correct way to translate this word.
yeah,
He instead decided to translate it in a way that was like meaningful to him, in a way that matched his dialect and his culture and his sort of
yeah,
understanding of the story. So the way he starts his Beowulf is just so, because of
yeah,
course he's from Ireland and that's their way of telling anecdotes. And it's
yeah,
that Irish soul that begins a story that tells you, all right, I'm going to tell you a story now. It's a
yeah.
really good way of translating a story.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So I'll have to check that out.
Absolutely.
And is it so? Did it influence Tolkien? Were there any other authors that influenced that you know of?
Tolkien, Heaney, I think Hughes talks about being influenced by Beowulf, all of those kind of that era of writers. I think, is C.S. Lewis someone? You would know,
Yeah,
C.S.
yeah,
Lewis,
yeah.
when we talk about Beowulf.
All of Tolkien's writing group, the Inklings, were mad about all of those texts. Like they started like being friends because they set up their own little group reading Norse myths, actually. And then they started going into the Anglo-Saxon stuff and things as well, which Tolkien was sort of trying to revive, really, because a lot of people had moved on a little bit from that. And he was insisting that that was a part of literature that everyone else was sort of putting aside as language because it's a different language from what we speak now. But it's, he was trying to integrate that back into a literary canon back in the day. And very much of the school of thought that said Shakespeare was too modern for university study. So that was the sort of movement. The Inklings were Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and Charles Williams, and then they had some other friends who were part of the group, like Lewis's brother Warney, and who we owe quite a lot of the info of to, because he wrote his diary about all that. What are the other study colleagues of theirs that took part sometimes in discussions and things like that. So yeah,
Well,
We're all very much into that.
really cool. It's being a fly on the wall there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing, really. Like seeing how it's inspired so many people and continues to inspire people. So, have you got any advice to anyone like who would like to learn more? Like, I know the essays are sometimes better than reading these things because they are,
Mm.
unless you can get your head around the way things are worded and stuff, it can be a bit tricky. So, is there any good explainers that you know of?
Yeah, I mean, Tolkien's essay on Beowulf, well, Tolkien's multiple essays, but there's one particular one that I know pretty well. It is a pretty good, not necessarily of explaining, because he doesn't do much of that, but of
Yeah,
like talking you around to his way of thinking about Beowulf. He kind of talks about the fact that he doesn't think of it as an epic or as a heroic story, which is bizarre. But, and that he thinks it more of like a story that's made out of building blocks. It's kind of more about life and all of the kind of the way that the world was back in that time, or the way that the world was thought of by these oral traditions.
yeah.
His essays are pretty good.
Yeah, I agree.
What do you think about King Arthur?
Oof, difficult. I don't really. I did a module on King Arthur at uni, but I don't really remember the. I read so many like essays on also on like the original text and then translations. They made us read it all in Middle English. So that was fun. It's actually for anyone who's interested or is wants to get that flavor. I would suggest to read a little bit out of the text and maybe like have one with a translation on the other page or something. That's sometimes helpful, that you don't get annoyed, but you will understand a lot more than you think in the Middle English text.
Yeah.
It's not like the sort of reading for pleasure kind of thing, but if it's just a page or something, it gives you a flavor and it gives you like a bit of an inkling of what the medieval text would have sounded like to an audience who read it. So
Yeah. And what do you think writers can take from these stories? Because they've obviously left impressions on people. So what is it that's about them that has sort of endured? Is it the sort of grand adventures and it is like escapism, isn't it? Medieval escapism with all the monsters and the dragons and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that for sure. The kind of dragons and the big, huge parts of the story. That I mean, Tolkien's story is also kind of a heroic epic. So a lot of as a lot of fantasy is. I think those kind of parts of the story always linger on too. But I think having written, being currently writing historical fiction, it's hard to underestimate how useful it is to hear the voice of kind of those older times, because it's
Yeah.
incredibly hard to think about what would people have thought about and talked about and told stories about all of these years ago. And
Yeah.
sometimes having something like this where you can read, obviously this is a fictional tale about dragons, but at the same time you can kind of read the sensibilities and the thoughts and the dreams of the people all that time ago. That can sometimes give you a bit of an insight into an older world that we have no other real way of accessing, I think.
Yeah. Nice. Oh, well, it's been brilliant chatting about this. Thank you very much for giving up your time to discuss it with me for the benefit of everyone there listening at home. How
yeah.
can we find out a bit more about you guys and the Faith Fellows podcast?
So we're on Anchor and thereby sort of all good podcast platforms. So just look up Fellows podcasts, and on social media we are just Fellows on Twitter and Fellows podcast everywhere else. So that's on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. So do check us out if you'd like to hear
Nice.
more of our crazy tales.
Amazing. I'll be putting the links in the description as well. So if anyone is interested in checking out, you can just have a little look below and find more there. But thank you very much again. And thank you everyone at home for listening. A massive thank you to Janina and Lucy for giving up their time to chat about these quite remarkable stories. Something I love about them is that nobody knows who really wrote them, apart from like the more contemporary tales. But Beowulf, Sir Gawain, the Green Knight, these tales are just sort of almost gifts from that period in time. No one knows who wrote them for sure. And that's what makes them so interesting to me. I really hope you learned something new from our conversation. I myself have gone and got myself a copy of Seamus Heaney's Beowulf. I'm reading that, and it's fantastic so far. It's quite refreshing to read poetry as someone who just pretty much always reads novels and short stories. So, yeah, it's very good. If you happen to get a copy yourself of Beowulf or any of the Arthurian legend tales, please get in touch to let me know what you think. And why not join our writing community to discuss them too? We meet on Facebook and Discord. We've got hundreds of people in each one, and it's open to everybody. You can find a link in the description below. And that is about all for today. Thank you very much for listening. To make sure that you don't miss the next episode, which is coming out on the 14th of November, subscribe and follow. If you really did enjoy the episode, please consider giving us a quick rating on Spotify. It's really helpful in helping us reach new people and more people discovering the show. So really do appreciate that. Thank you very much. If you'd like to learn more about the show, if you'd like to get access to writing classes, special interviews, and writing guides that you can't find anywhere else, head over to our Patreon page. The link is in the description. And don't forget, on the 30th of November, we've got our free book marketing class, which is all about email marketing. So if you want to learn more about this medium of promoting your books and engaging with your followers, then you want to sign up for free today. It's basically packed with insights that myself and Emma Dacey have learned after many years of trial and error and doing things the hard way. We've now pretty much got our email marketing where we want it to be, and we're at the stage now where we feel confident enough to share these insights with everybody else. So I look forward to seeing you there if you're able to make it, but if not, don't worry, because I'll send you the recording straight after. So to sign up, again, just click the link in the description below. And that is about all. We'll be back on the 14th of November, and until then, keep on scribbling.